AEW Redemption is heating up. On this episode of Dynamite, we had the celebration for Kenny Omega, the new champion in AEW. And even though we know at All In we are going to get Kenny Omega versus Will Ospreay, it is now crystal clear that at the Redemption pay-per-view, it will be Kenny Omega versus the Jet Kevin Knight. We're going to be talking about all that and more right now on the All Elite Dirt Sheet.
This is All Elite Dirt Sheet. Hey! Hey! Hey!
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the All Elite Dirt Sheet, your AEW Dynamite post show. I'm your host, Mike Dinero, and today we have a very, very, very stacked show because AEW Dynamite was a very good show. We are building towards AEW Redemption taking place next Sunday, a week from this Sunday, and it's going to be a very good show. You know, there's been a lot of tossing and turning and monkey wrenches thrown into the plans, and I thought going into after the AEW Forbidden Door pay-per-view, I thought we knew the path for Redemption. And since then, after Kenny Omega won the world title last week, there was a lot of new things on the horizon for AEW. And I'm so excited for everything because there's a lot of cool stuff happening. But first, I want to give a big shout out to everybody who's joining us today. Thank you so much for joining and checking out the All Elite Dirt Sheet. If you're joining for the first time, make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. All that support is also appreciated. Follow us on TikTok at All Elite Dirt Sheet. Follow us also on TikTok at On This Day on AEW. Shout out to my co-host Tim King. He will be back next week, but got a lot to talk about. Before anything, let's start with the breaking news that is on the WWE side, that is also affecting AEW. And that breaking news is announced today on the 16th. WWE is going to not only be going head-to-head against AEW at All In on the 30th, but September 26th, WWE presents the Worlds Collide PLE featuring AAA and NXT. Not only is that show going to be starting at the same time as AEW All Out, but they are going to be also in Chicago, running the same city as AEW. The nerve of the WWE, the nerve of TKO. They are making AAA and NXT the sacrificial lamb because there is no possible way in hell you tune in to AAA and NXT's Worlds Collide over AEW All Out after what's probably going to be a history-making AEW All In 1 month before. I don't know why the WWE feels the need to continue to counter-program AEW. And then they go on and say that AEW is not competition. AEW is not competition. They're not real competition, blah, 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 blah. The need to counter-program every single PLE or pay-per-view that AEW has makes them competition in your eyes. And it's also, like I said, setting up your shows for failure. Because when you have a show like AAA that is very good, you know, let's fuck the tribalism shit. AAA is very good. NXT is very good. When you have these shows going head-to-head against AEW, and AEW's on absolute fire this year on pay-per-view. No one's doing pay-per-view like AEW. When you're going head-to-head against AEW on pay-per-view, you're setting up your shows for failure. Now, look, do I think that AEW is the best wrestling product in the world right now? 100%. Let's look at the money-wise. WWE is still number one when it comes to money. It's still number one when it comes to box office draw. It's still number one when it comes to mainstream appeal. But if you're number one, you never have to look at number two, and I don't know why they are constantly counter-programming AEW. It makes to hurt the competition when you should be focusing on yourself. It's absolutely ridiculous. AEW All Out, taking place September 26th, is going to be a banger of a show. I don't know many people who are going to choose to watch Worlds Collide over AEW All Out. That's my opinion. But yeah, I thought that was very interesting because it was just announced like right before I hit the record button that WWE is going to be running not only the same time, but in the same city as AEW on the same night. Absolutely ridiculous. The AEW Dynamite was a very good show. I want to get right into it because before we get to All In, before we get to All Out, we got to talk about AEW Redemption. It's going to be going down a week from Sunday, and the pay-per-view starting to really shape up. After this episode of AEW Dynamite, we have some really, really good matches. First of all, please bear with me. Allergy season is crazy. Right now on the East Coast, we have a lot of fog and smog from the Canadian wildfires, which is making the air quality even worse. So I'm trying to power through this because it is really, really affecting, but I'm going to power through this. I got to talk about how good the show was. AEW Dynamite took place on Wednesday, July 15th, live from the MGM Music Hall in Boston. If I'm not mistaken, this is a music hall that is connected to Fenway Park, which is pretty cool. Fenway Park, a whole lot of history there. Really, really awesome to see this venue. It was another unique looking venue, a real unique looking music hall. And I love when AEW does these unique looking venues. We talked about it last week when they were on the beach for Beach Break. I love when they go to the Hammerstein Ballroom. I love when they do these unique looking venues because on the other side, when we talk about WWE, everything looks uniformed. Everything looks the same week in, week out. You don't ever have any uniqueness when it comes to the WWE. And in AEW, week to week, you'll have different settings, different venues, and it gives the show a different vibe. And especially an intimate vibe like this makes that crowd even louder. I don't care. This Boston crowd was absolutely insane all night. This was a very loud crowd, and they were going ape shit throughout the show, and which made the venue feel even bigger than what it probably was. And it made the show a lot more exciting because when you have a crowd that's going that ape shit during everything, you're going to have a real exciting time watching the show. So we take a look at Beach Break last week. We start off when we see the whole, everything that went down on Beach Break, besides what happened in the main event with Kenny Omega and MJF, because we're going to be taking a closer look at that later on in the show, because today we're going to have a Kenny Omega title win celebration, which I thought was pretty cool. Kenny Omega definitely deserves a celebration. But then we go right into it. We hear from the Death Riders. We hear from Daniel Garcia, who is training with Will Ospreay. And he says that when you get the Death Rider patch, like Will Ospreay did, that means that the work is just beginning. All of a sudden, Jon Moxley comes in and he tells everyone to go get ready for the matchup because we're about to have a tag team matchup between the Death Riders and Cope and Cage. And Moxley tells Ospreay, he says, the hard part is done. This is a simple decision going into All In. And you need to know that you need to take your shot no matter who the target is. You have to pull the trigger. Knowing that Will Ospreay and Kenny Omega are good friends. Knowing that Will Ospreay and Kenny Omega have a lot of history and a lot of respect for each other. Do not let that blind you from the fact that your destiny lies at the hands at Kenny Omega's defeat at All In. You must pull the trigger when it's time to pull the trigger. You cannot hold back just because you have respect for Kenny Omega. I thought that this was a great, great segment because every single week, Jon Moxley dropping knowledge on Will Ospreay, making him a more dangerous competitor, has just been cinema, and I love it. We go to the first matchup of the night. It is for the AEW Tag Team Champions. It is Daniel Garcia and Wheeler Yuta representing the Death Riders versus Cope and Cage. This was a very fun matchup. I really did enjoy this. I really love the team of Wheeler Yuta and Daniel Garcia. We've been talking about it a lot on this episode, on this podcast, about Daniel Garcia really finding his place in the Death Riders. But one person who's still been kind of like the weak link of the Death Riders has been Wheeler Yuta. I think Wheeler Yuta and Daniel Garcia's, their styles really mesh with each other. So them as a tag team is really fun. I think that they should continue as the tag team of the Death Riders. Have Claudio go after singles gold, have Pac go after singles gold, and then Jon Moxley go after singles gold as the Continental Champion. But have Daniel Garcia and have Wheeler Yuta as your tag team. They definitely mesh really well, and they complement each other's style. But Cope and Cage was too much of a matchup here for the young Wheeler Yuta and young Daniel Garcia. Cope and Cage bringing them more experience, bringing the big fight feel, and Cope and Cage win with a pop-up spear, which I always love when they do that. When Cage pops up one of the opponents and Cope catches them in a spear. Really good victory. Cope and Cage are still your tag team champions. And then out of nowhere, out comes Claudio and the Dogs. So Claudio and the Dogs, they attack Cope and Cage. And this leads to Cope Cage fighting off not only Daniel Garcia and Wheeler Yuta, but Clark Connors, David Finlay, and Claudio Castagnoli. Then out comes the Bang Bang Gang. The Bang Bang Gang then come out and they fight off the Dogs and the Death Riders, which then leads to a empty ring with just Christian Cage and David Finlay in there. David Finlay grabs the shillelagh and he looks like he's going to go attack Christian Cage. And then out comes Jay White, who didn't come out with the rest of the Bang Bang Gang. He grabs the shillelagh. David Finlay bails. And then Christian Cage turns around and he just sees Jay White with the shillelagh standing over him. So now he's confused. Christian Cage still has a problem with Jay White. He does not want no parts of this alliance with Cope and the Bang Bang Gang. So we have a little bit of a face-to-face confrontation here. Adam Copeland tries to calm everyone down, and we go into the next segment with Christian Cage walking off as Adam Copeland shakes hands with the rest of the Bang Bang Gang. After this matchup and this segment, we go back and we see highlights of Collision, which I think is cool because it makes Collision feel like it's definitely a part of the storylines of what's happening on Dynamite. It's not its own entity. What's going on Collision plays out on Dynamite, which is really cool. And we see the highlights of Mark Davis retaining his national champion against Speedball Mike Bailey. This is leading to an awesome video package for Andrade Idolo, who's just chilling on the yacht with a babe, and that's just Andrade doing what Andrade does. My man is oozing machismo. We then hear from Andrade, and he says that he will go one-on-one with anybody in the Don Callis family. He will take them all out, and he will take every single piece of gold that the Don Callis family has. Renee Paquette then says, yeah, but aren't you concerned about the numbers? There's a lot of advantages on the Don Callis family if you're going into this by yourself. And then Andrade says, well, I got the equalizer. He pulls out the Dynamite Diamond Ring that belongs to MJF that Will Ospreay stole from MJF last week when MJF went to go hit Kenny Omega with it and Will Ospreay came out and prevented that from happening. He then gave that Dynamite Diamond Ring, allegedly, to Andrade. So Andrade has the ring and he says, this is the difference maker. And Renee says, who gave you that? Was it Will Ospreay? And Andrade said, Renee, how you know? This leads to the Andrade matchup against Jake Doyle, which is going to be a number one contender. Well, not number one contender matchup, because if Jake Doyle loses, Andrade gets a title shot. I guess if Jake Doyle wins, Jake Doyle doesn't get the title shot. Andrade just doesn't get a title shot. So Andrade versus Jake Doyle, really good matchup. Like I said, you got Andrade I've been singing this guy's praises for the last 3-4 months, man. Ever since coming to AEW, this is the best Andrade that we've seen. And Andrade looks like $1 million in this matchup. But first, Jake Doyle starts out really quickly, takes out Andrade to the outside. It looks like Andrade hit hard onto the floor. Jake Doyle's really using that size advantage, that power advantage. You had Andrade fight back, and he got the comeback. Andrade takes off one of his shirts. He had a How You Know shirt, and under it, he had the shirt that says, fuck Don, fuck MJF, but he had it censored. He had a red piece of tape over the F word. Really good matchup, though. In the end, Andrade defeats Jake Doyle. He is now your number one contender for the national champion. And we will be getting Andrade versus Mark Davis at Redemption, which should be a phenomenal, phenomenal matchup. Andrade and Mark Davis is going to be great. It's going to bang. And as good as Mark Davis is, as much as we sing the praise of Dump Truck Davis, I do not think that Mark Davis is walking out of Redemption still your national champion. I think that we're going to see gold around the waist of Andrade, and Andrade will be your AEW national champion. But speaking of champions, we go backstage and we hear from the trios champions, the conglomeration, Roderick Strong, Kyle O'Reilly, and Orange Cassidy, and they said that they're open for any challengers. Where's the challengers? Which then leads to the Demand showing up, and the Demand say that they want the trios titles. Even though Roderick Strong, Kyle O'Reilly, and Orange Cassidy look like they're like about to defend themselves because they know that the Demand is always going to pull out some dastardly shit and they're going to probably attack them. They're ready for the attack. But Ricochet says, don't worry, we're not going to lay a finger on you. And then from the back, behind them, Jay Lethal, Blake Christian, and Lee Johnson, the Lethal Swirl, Lethal Twist. I don't know what they're calling themselves this week. It was the Lethal Swirl. There was the Lethal Twist. They attack the trios champions. They attack Roderick Strong, Kyle O'Reilly, and they attack Orange Cassidy, which leads to Ricochet saying, we told you the Demand was not going to lay a finger on you. And these three gentlemen are not part of the Demand yet. So does the Demand get a upgrade? Does the Demand get bigger? And do they add Jay Lethal, Blake Christian and Lee Johnson to that stable. I like the demand as a trios, I'm not going to lie, but I like that they're trying to give a direction to someone like Blake Christian, someone like Jay Lethal, who's an absolute legend, and someone like Lee Johnson, who has a lot of upside. So I really think that this would take them to the next level. I wouldn't mind that. I would like that. We then see footage of Kenny Omega last week beating MJF for the world title. This was the footage that they did not show earlier in the night because they were leading it for this segment. They were leaving it for the start of the Kenny Omega celebration, which was a lot to talk about because a lot went down. But we see Kenny Omega come out. Tony Schiavone calls out Kenny Omega, and we have a big Omega sign, Omega logo in the ring with a bunch of pictures of Kenny Omega throughout his career. I think they even had his cat, which was awesome because you know how much Kenny loves his cat. Tony Schiavone brings out Kenny Omega, and when Kenny Omega comes out to a lot of fanfare, a big pop, out of nowhere, before he even says anything, the Young Bucks come out. Now, remind you, the Young Bucks were not there last week during Beach Break. There was nobody in Kenny Omega's corner or side, so this is the first time we see the Young Bucks celebrate with Kenny Omega as the new champion. And they said they knew that Kenny Omega was going to pull this off because Kenny Omega is still the best wrestler in the world. He did it with no one's help because he is the best bout machine. But the only thing that irks them, Matt Jackson says the only thing that skeeves him is that Kenny Omega's walking around with that belt, that title, the Triple B version of the AEW World Champion. And he said that he wanted to present him with the actual AEW World Champion. Gone is the Triple B. Gone is the brown belt. We got AEW's classic World Champion over the waist of Kenny Omega, and it looked so good. It looked absolutely perfect. Kenny Omega said that it is time for him to really walk out as a man who is prideful to be the world champion. He said that he knows that come All In, he's going to be probably going face to face with Will Ospreay, and he knows that even though there is time in between now and All In, he still has to get ready. But by the time he gets to All In against Will Ospreay, this will be the best Kenny Omega that AEW has ever seen. Out comes Will Ospreay to another big pop. Like I said, that Boston crowd was going crazy the whole night. Out comes Will Ospreay to a big pop, and he tells the Young Bucks, with all due respect, man, me and Kenny just have the ring. Kenny Omega gives the nod. It's okay. We have Kenny Omega in the ring, face-to-face with his future opponent at All In, Will Ospreay. This was a great promo. Will Ospreay said that there was times in the last couple years that he feels like Kenny Omega stopped believing in himself. There was times when he felt like he believed in Kenny Omega more than Kenny Omega believed in himself. He says that he felt Kenny Omega gave up on himself. He says, but after last week, after Kenny Omega won the title, the cleaner is back. The best bout machine is back. And the greatest to ever do it is back. And he is so happy to see it because that belt looks so good over Kenny Omega's waist. He said that over the last 10 years, Kenny Omega has been a hero to him. A hero. Someone that he could look up to. Someone he could idolize. And he thanks Kenny Omega for being such an idol to him. He then says that he is not happy with being number 2. He's not happy being the second best in the world because he thrives to be the best in the world. He thrives to be better than Kenny Omega. He thrives to win that title in his country at All In. And he says that at All In, they're going to show each other, they're going to show the world why this is where the best wrestle. One line that I had to point out. You know my fucking geek ass marked out when Will Ospreay said that they're going to put on a matchup, a real life Goku versus Vegeta fight. If you didn't get that, that was a Dragon Ball reference. And if you like Dragon Ball, check out Scouter Vision, my other podcast. But I thought that was awesome that Will Ospreay did a Dragon Ball reference calling himself Vegeta, calling Will Ospreay Goku. And it fits. It fits. If you know Goku and Vegeta's personalities and how close they are, but they are always in competition with each other. Even though that they are allies and they work together, Vegeta always thrives to be better than Goku. That is exactly what Will Ospreay and Kenny Omega are here. But they are going to prove to the world that AEW is where the best wrestler come All In. They go to shake hands, but before they hit that mega power handshake, out comes the Jet Kevin Knight. The Jet Kevin Knight says that he is not here to talk to Will Ospreay. He has nothing to say to Will Ospreay. So Will Ospreay, you can leave. Kenny Omega said that he would actually like Will Ospreay to stay. He says that he doesn't need to go anywhere. Kevin Knight says that Maxwell Jacob Fraudman promised him a world title shot, and he's here to collect. Even if MJF is no longer champion, he is still owed that world title shot for working with MJF at Forbidden Door in that 12-man cage. And then Kenny Omega says, I am not going to give you a title shot because I feel like I have to keep a promise that MJF gave to you. He said when he won the world title, when Kenny Omega won the world title in 2020, he thought that the celebration that he was going to get was only empty and no one came to his party because it was during coronavirus, because it was during COVID and everyone had to stay in. But the real reason why no one came to the party was because he didn't earn that title. He sold his soul to get that title. He sold his soul to get that championship when he had Don Callis help him beat Jon Moxley for that world championship. He didn't earn that championship. Don Callis was the one who took that title from Jon Moxley, not Kenny Omega. And he said, if you want a title shot at Redemption, don't bring Don Callis, because what you're becoming is Don Callis's lapdog. You're becoming Don Callis's bitch. He said, when I think of the Jet Kevin Knight, when I saw you for the first time, I saw someone who was faster than everybody, someone who had the look, someone who had the in-ring talent, someone who was going to be a future champion. He said that TNT title around your waist, that world title that is on my way, you could win this. You could earn this. But Kevin Knight, the Jet, could earn it, not Don Callis is a little bitch. He said, I feel in that heart, I still believe in you. Kind of like the speedball Mike Bailey believes in you. Kind of like these people still believe in you. And because of that, you're going to get that title shot because I still feel like there's some good in your heart. Kevin Knight then says, there's no good in his heart, only greatness. And then he takes out Kenny Omega with the microphone. Well, Ospreay tries to hit the hidden blade, but Kevin Knight ducks. He runs out. He goes to run to the back, but Darby Allin stops him. Darby Allin attacks Kevin Knight, which leads to Brian Cage, who will be facing off against Darby Allin later in the night, to attack Darby Allin. And then we got the Don Callis B team. Shout out to Tim, who calls him the B team. The Don Callis B team attacks Kenny Omega, Will Ospreay, and Darby Allin, which leads to the Death Riders making the save, which leads to Claudio Castagnoli and Jon Moxley coming out and making the save. It was very telling, the facial expressions from Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay and how much they deferred. A couple minutes ago, we had Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay showing nothing but love to each other, showing nothing but respect to each other, and showing that they are on the same page when it comes to putting on a banger at All In. But once the Death Riders come out and they back up Will Ospreay and Kenny Omega, Will Ospreay looks happy that the Death Riders are there, that his boys have his back. Kenny Omega is like, what are you guys doing out here? We don't need the Death Riders. I love this extra wrinkle to the story. It's going to add so much as we are on the build to All In. But the biggest thing that came out of this whole segment is the main event of Redemption will be Kenny Omega versus the Jet Kevin Knight for the world champion. So for everyone thinking that MJF was just going to get a rematch at the pay-per-view, win the title back, and then we get MJF versus Will Ospreay at All In, not going to happen. It was reported that MJF is going to take some time off, but he will still be at All In. And there's going to be, something that factors him into All In. But as of right now, it still looks like it's going to be one-on-one Kenny versus Will Ospreay at All In. Dude, Kenny versus the Jet Kevin Knight is going to be a really good matchup. A predictable matchup? 100%. Do I think that the Jet Kevin Knight has any chance in the world beating Kenny Omega and then main eventing All In? No. Maybe one day. Is he a future champion? 100%. The guy is amazing. He has a lot of upside. Is it his time right now? Absolutely not. Kenny Omega will beat the Jet Kevin Knight at at Redemption. Really good segment. This set the table for not only next month's pay-per-view, but for the pay-per-view in a week. So I really, really did like this segment. Next up on the show, we had a matchup between Bandido, the team of Brody King and Bandido, versus Nick Comoroto and Aaron Solo, who we haven't seen on Dynamite for, I don't know, like 5-6 years. I know they've been spending a lot of time in Ring of Honor. Aaron Solo and Nick Comoroto was around Dynamite for a lot of the pandemic era. They were always teamed up with QT Marshall. So we haven't seen them in quite some time on Dynamite. This was a quick squash match. Bandido destroys them. And then after the matchup, they put up the most wanted sign. They hold the most wanted sign of Bandido, which leads to backstage. Kyle Fletcher is getting ready for his matchup against Komander for the international champion. And Bandido bangs into them. And Bandido throws that most wanted sign into Kyle Fletcher's chest, alluding to a possible international title matchup come Redemption between Bandido and Kyle Fletcher, which is going to absolute bang. We do have that matchup confirmed later in the night. But next, before we get to that matchup, Kyle Fletcher has to defeat Komander, which was a very good matchup on this card. Kyle Fletcher versus Komander for the AEW International Champion. Absolute banger. Komander is a fucking... Dude, he's a fucking star. He's a star. AEW has so many stars. They have these wrestlers on reserve at all times that are on the bench waiting to get on Dynamite, waiting to get on Collision, who are, doing a lot of good stuff in Ring of Honor. And when they come up here, they always show out. Komander and Kyle Fletcher was an absolute great matchup. Komander is definitely one of those guys that you could always rely on to put on a fun show. Had the crowd behind him, doing some crazy acrobatic shit that you could never see. I would like to see Komander versus Bandido, to be honest. I think that would be a banger matchup too. But Kyle Fletcher wins the matchup. After the matchup, Kyle Fletcher goes to rip off the mask off of Komander, which leads to Konosuke Takeshita coming out and fighting off Kyle Fletcher, which leads to Okada coming out and hitting the Rainmaker on Takeshita, which leads to Okada and Kyle Fletcher going face-to-face and mean-mugging each other over that international champion, which leads to Bandido taking out everybody. So what we got out of that was Kyle Fletcher's next opponent is going to be Bandido at Redemption. But Takeshita still wants that title. Okada wants his title back. And Kyle Fletcher holds that title. So I know TK been saying it for a long time. Tim King, not Tony Khan. Tim King been saying for a long time, I think we're going to be getting a three-way at All In between Kyle Fletcher, Okada, and Takeshita. That's going to be an absolute banger of a matchup. Dude, All In's looking like it's going to be a fucking insane card. You put Kenny Omega versus Will Ospreay on that card. On the same card, you have Fletcher versus Okada versus Takeshita. Is this not where the best wrestle? Who's questioning if this is where the best wrestle? Is this not where the best wrestle? Come on, dude. Come on. Backstage, we see Kenny Omega, and he says that he still believes that there's good in Kevin Knight. He said he still believes that there's good in Kevin Knight's heart, no matter what happened out there tonight. And then Darby Allin cuts him off, and he says, you don't get it, Kenny. You don't get it. Kevin Knight is so far gone, and you have to beat it out of him. You think there's good there? You have to beat it out of him, just like he's going to do next week for the TNT title. So before we get to Redemption, Darby Allin, Kevin Knight, TNT title goes down next week. He says he's going to beat that good out of him if there's still good in there. So who knows if Kevin Knight even has a TNT title going into Redemption. After Darby Allin walks off, Jon Moxley comes into the frame, and he says, Kenny, Darby's right. Some people can't change as much as they try. And he gives eyes to Kenny Omega like, you are not the person you're putting on to be. You are still a scumbag. You're still the guy who stole that title from me in 2020. I love the fact that even though Jon Moxley is playing this mentor for Will Ospreay, you still have Jon Moxley planting the seeds that Kenny Omega is not a good guy like Will Ospreay thinks he is. You still have Kenny Omega telling Will Ospreay, Jon Moxley's not the good guy like he thinks he is. Somewhere down the line, I do feel like before we get to All In, we're going to have a showdown between Kenny and Jon Moxley. It's not the first time that we've seen all three of these men, have some type of interaction. But Kenny and Mox have something that's going on right now, and I cannot wait to see what happens with them. Really, really fun. We then see outside, Renee brings out the Brawling Birds, who are saying that they're not going to let down England, kind of like England did in the World Cup, because I believe yesterday England lost in the World Cup. To be honest, I am not up to date with everything going on with the World Cup, but they said that they promised to never let England down, and they have their sights on Wembley. We've been saying it, Divine Dominion, Brawling Birds, Wembley Stadium. It makes all the sense. Make it happen. After this, we have a eerie-looking vignette. We have an eerie-looking segment by Chris Jericho, who is not being, Chris Jericho, the rock star, Chris Jericho, the learning tree. This is the Painmaker Chris Jericho, the Clockwork Orange style Chris Jericho with the face paints. And he says that he wants a rematch against Tommaso Ciampa at Redemption. And then we have Tommaso Ciampa. He accepts the challenge. So I thought it would have been better for this matchup to have a rematch at All In, hold Jericho off the shelf until All In. I guess I'm fine with them doing it at Redemption, but I hope that this leads to Tommaso Ciampa still having a spot at the All In card. And I like the extra wrinkle of Chris Jericho bringing out the Painmaker gimmick. We haven't seen that in AEW probably since 2021, maybe 2022 latest. So I always like the Painmaker style of Chris Jericho. One of the more infamous matches that the Painmaker Chris Jericho had in AEW was the matchup that he had against Nick Gage, which was just a hardcore spectacle. But every time Chris Jericho pulls out that Painmaker gimmick, he always is a little bit more extreme, a little bit more hardcore, and a little bit more batshit crazy. So you put that in the ring against the Psycho Killer, you're going to have a fucking crazy matchup. So I'm looking forward to that matchup at Redemption. Another matchup being added to this card, really stacking it out. So as of right now, you have Kenny versus the Jet, main event. You have Andrade versus Mark Davis for the national champion. You have, let's see who else. You have Kyle Fletcher versus Bandido. Dude, this is looking really, really stacked so far. I really like what we are seeing for this card. Next matchup, we have Brian Cage versus Darby Allin. We've seen them get into it earlier in the night during that Kenny Omega segment. Brian Cage is just tossing Darby Allin from pillar to post here, man. He's just tossing him around. Darby Allin has the best matches, I feel, against these bigger guys where he could wrestle from the bottom and have to find a way to chop down these big wrestlers down to size. Find these like special, it's like Home Alone, right? You got Home Alone. You have Kevin McAllister who's finding all these traps to get the upper hand. That's what Darby Allin matches are like when he's going against guys like Brian Cage, who obviously outpower him, obviously outsize him. You had Darby Allin he trips up Brian Cage onto the steps, hits a coffin drop, then hits 2 coffin drops in the ring, gets the victory. Darby Allin is looking strong going into his matchup next week against Kevin Knight for the TNT Championship. And then for the main event, we had the women in the main event. It's been a while since we've seen the women in the main. Well, not really. It's been only a couple of weeks. We did have that TBS Survival of the Fittest matchup, but it's not often that the women are in the main event. So this was really cool to see. It was a trios matchup. It was Divine Dominion and Mercedes Moné, who we saw made an alliance last week, going against Willow, the winner of the Casino Battle Royal last week to become the number 1 contender. We have Willow and the team of Maya World and Hyon. This was a very fun matchup. Everyone got a lot of shine. I thought that was a good way to let the show go off the air with a lot of action after we got a lot of storyline and a lot of storytelling to build up to the pay-per-view. It looks fun, but I knew when they added Hyon, Maya World's tag team partner in Ring of Honor, I knew when they added her to this matchup, she was probably going to take the loss because you don't have Divine Dominion lose right now. You don't have Mercedes lose right now. Willow's the number 1 contender, and Maya World just became a big star. Who's the weakest link? Who doesn't fit here? And it's Hyon. And I'm not saying that she doesn't belong, but I am saying that out of everybody else, out of the other 5 competitors, who could afford to take the loss? Hyon, right? Really good matchup. In the end, Mercedes wins with the statement maker or the money maker. I forgot what she calls it. But Mercedes wins with Divine Dominion. Good Dynamite. I mean, shit, this was a good Dynamite. I don't think it was at the level of Beach Break, but Beach Break was absolutely phenomenal. It was like a pay-per-view. And like I said, you are going to have these shows that set up other shows. You're not going to have these banger shows every single week. If I had to give it a score, I would give it a strong 4. I mean, I thought it was really fun. The Kenny Omega segment, like I said, that was such a strong segment setting up not only the main event of Redemption, but also the main event of All In. You had great action throughout the night. I love the tag title matchup. The main event was really fun. Darby and Cage was a lot of fun. Jake Doyle and Andrade was a lot of fun. Always good to see Bandido. Kyle Fletcher versus Komander was match of the night by far. They stole the show. It was phenomenal. Great atmosphere. The crowd was going apeshit during most of you. What are you going to really say? Like, there was nothing really wrong with the show. The only reason why I don't give it higher than a 4 was I do feel like the show was here to set up more shows. This was a bit of the hangover after Beach Break to lead you to Redemption. And I feel like because of that, they tried to get a lot on this show so they don't do everything last minute. But it was a great show nonetheless. Great show nonetheless. Collision looks stacked. Dynamite next week looks stacked. And then we got Redemption coming up in a week. So AEW's on fire right now. Going into next month, what will be their biggest month of the year, going to All In. AEW's on absolute fire right now. And I appreciate everybody who checked us out. Thank you so much. Like I said, a little shorter show today. I'm surprised I even held up. I'm like dying over here. But a little shorter show today. TK will be back soon. I appreciate, every time I do this with TK, it's always a lot of fun. This was a great show, though. Great Dynamite. I really enjoyed it. 4 out of 5 stars. I can't wait to see what happens next week. I can't wait for Redemption. It's going to be a whole lot of fun coming up for AEW. But with that being said, catch us next week with a new episode of the All Elite Dirt Sheet. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. I love you all. We will see you next week on a new episode of the All Elite Dirt Sheets. Peace out.
Hey!